Everyone laughed when the quiet African woman pushed a cleaning cart through the polished hallways of Korea's most powerful corporation. The executives ignored her. The employees called her the invisible cleaner. Even the cold, arrogant Seoul looked straight through her, believing she was just another foreign worker struggling to survive in Seoul. No one knew her real name. No one knew why she had chosen to hide behind a janitor's uniform. And no one imagined that a single document locked inside the chairman's office would expose a truth so shocking it would shake the entire company. She wasn't there to clean. She was there to uncover betrayal. Because years earlier, the company's late founder had secretly transferred half of his shares to the daughter of the woman who once saved his life in Africa. That daughter had finally returned. Now the billionaire CEO who had mocked her would have to face a truth that could cost him everything, including his heart. By the time he realized who she really was, it was already too late. Welcome to Afrokorea Seoul Stories, where love, secrets, and destiny collide in the heart of Seoul. This is the unforgettable story of Amara Okafor and Kang Min-jun. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the skyline of Seoul as thousands of employees hurried toward the towering headquarters of Kang Global Group. Expensive cars lined the entrance. Executives in tailored suits walked through the revolving doors without looking at anyone around them. Among them was a woman wearing a simple blue cleaning uniform. She pushed a cleaning cart slowly, her eyes calm and observant. Her name tag read only one word, Amara. To everyone else, she was just another contract cleaner from Africa, trying to earn a living in South Korea. But appearances can be deceiving. Inside her small shoulder bag was a worn leather notebook that had belonged to her late mother. Tucked between its pages was an old photograph of a smiling Korean businessman standing beside a young African nurse in front of a small rural clinic. On the back of the photograph were handwritten words. "If anything ever happens to me, my family will honor this promise." Amara had read those words hundreds of times. After her mother's passing, she discovered letters revealing a secret that had been hidden for more than 20 years. A Korean businessman whom her mother had saved during a humanitarian trip to Africa had never forgotten her kindness. Before his death, he made arrangements that would one day change Amara's life forever. But someone inside Kang Global had buried the truth. That was why she was here. Not for the salary. Not for the uniform. She had come to uncover the promise that had been stolen. As she polished the marble floor outside the executive offices, employees walked past without acknowledging her. Some complained about tiny spots she had already cleaned. Others spoke as if she could not understand Korean. Amara remained silent. She understood every word. Months of studying the language had prepared her for this moment. Then the elevator doors opened. The atmosphere changed instantly. Employees straightened their backs. Conversation stopped. Out stepped Kang Min-jun. Tall, confident, and impossibly composed, he was the youngest CEO in the company's history. His reputation was legendary. He demanded perfection from everyone around him and trusted almost no one. As he walked toward his office, one employee accidentally bumped into Amara's cleaning cart. A bucket tipped over. Water spread across the polished floor. Several important documents slipped from an assistant's hands. The hallway fell silent. The assistant glared at Amara. "Watch where you're going." Before Amara could respond, Kang Min-jun turned to look at her. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Afrokorea Seoul Stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next emotional romance. Another incredible Afro-Korean love story is coming soon. For a brief moment, their eyes met. There was something strangely familiar about her calm expression, but he dismissed the feeling immediately. Without asking what had happened, he spoke in a cold voice. "Clean this up. My meeting starts in 3 minutes." Then he walked away. The employees whispered and laughed quietly as Amara knelt to wipe the floor. She said nothing. Instead, she glanced toward the CEO's office. Behind that door, she believed, lay the records that could prove her mother's story was true. She smiled faintly. "The truth," she whispered to herself, "has waited 20 years. It can wait a little longer." She picked up her cleaning cart and continued down the hallway, unaware that someone was already watching her from the security cameras. And that person knew exactly who she was. High above the executive floor, dozens of security monitors displayed every hallway inside Kong Global Group. A middle-aged man wearing a dark suit leaned closer to one of the screens. His name was Han Suk-woo, the company's longtime head of security. He had worked for the late chairman for more than 30 years and had seen countless employees come and go. But the young African cleaner caught his attention immediately. She moved with unusual confidence. She cleaned every corner carefully, yet her eyes always seemed to notice far more than they should. She quietly memorized office numbers, executive schedules, and the routines of the staff. This isn't the behavior of someone who is simply here to earn a paycheck, Han murmured. He replayed the security footage from the previous week. Every day, Amara arrived before sunrise. Every day, she spent a few extra seconds outside the office that had once belonged to the late chairman. Every day, she left without drawing attention to herself. Han frowned. It reminded him of someone he had promised never to forget. Meanwhile, on the top floor, Kang Min-jun's morning meeting had already begun. The boardroom was filled with directors discussing an important merger that could make Kong Global even more powerful. One executive proudly presented glowing financial reports. Another praised the CEO's leadership. Then, without warning, the presentation froze. The room fell silent. The projector had failed. Several employees rushed to fix it, but no one could identify the problem. Outside the boardroom, Amara was quietly mopping the hallway when she overheard the commotion. She hesitated for only a moment, politely knocking on the open door. She spoke in fluent Korean. "Excuse me, I think the cable connected to the backup server has come loose." The room turned toward her. Some directors looked annoyed that a cleaner had interrupted them. One manager laughed. "What would a cleaner know about our systems?" Min-jun folded his arms but nodded toward the technician. "Check it." The technician inspected the connection. A few seconds later, the screen flickered back to life. The presentation resumed perfectly. The room became uncomfortably quiet. No one expected the cleaning lady to solve the problem before the IT department could. Min-jun looked at Amara more carefully this time. "You understand computer systems?" Amara smiled politely. "My father taught me many things before he passed away." She bowed slightly and returned to her cleaning cart without another word. For the first time that day, Kang Min-jun found himself watching someone as she walked away. There was something unusual about her. She carried herself with dignity, not fear. It unsettled him. Later that evening, after nearly everyone had gone home, Amara quietly entered the old company library. Dust-covered shelves that no one had touched in years. She searched through company history books, newspaper clippings, and old annual reports. Then she found it. A faded photograph from more than 20 years earlier. Standing beside the late chairman was the same smiling African nurse from her mother's photograph. Tears filled Amara's eyes. "My mother told the truth," she whispered. Before she could read the article, footsteps echoed through the empty library. Someone was approaching. She quickly slipped the photograph into her notebook and stepped behind a bookshelf. The door opened slowly. It was Han Suk-woo. He looked around the quiet room before speaking into silence. "You don't have to hide anymore." Amara held her breath. Han's voice softened. "I've been waiting many years to meet the daughter of Grace Okafor." Amara slowly stepped out from behind the shelf. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Han bowed respectfully. "Your mother saved our chairman's life." He looked directly into her eyes. "And I believe someone inside this company stole what rightfully belongs to you." For the first time since arriving in Seoul, Amara realized she was no longer searching for the truth alone. The old library was silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock. Amara stared at Han Suk-woo, struggling to believe his words. "You knew my mother?" she asked softly. Han nodded. "I met Grace Okafor 22 years ago." He walked to a locked cabinet in the corner of the library and carefully removed a small wooden box. The edges were worn with age, and a thin layer of dust covered its surface. "I have protected this for many years," he said. "The late Chairman Kong ordered me to give it only to the daughter of the woman who saved his life." Amara's hands trembled as Han placed the box on the table. Inside was a silver pendant engraved with the Kong family crest, an old handwritten letter, and a photograph she had never seen before. In the photograph, Chairman Kong stood beside Grace Okafor, smiling warmly while holding the hand of a little girl. That little girl was Amara. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I don't remember this day," she whispered. "You were only 4 years old," Han replied. "The chairman visited your village one last time before returning to Korea. He promised your mother that if anything ever happened to her, you would always have a place in his family." Amara unfolded the letter. The chairman's handwriting was neat and steady. "To my dear friend Grace, you gave me a second chance at life when you expected nothing in return. No amount of money can repay such kindness. If fate keeps us apart, my family will honor this promise. Your daughter will always be treated as one of our own." Amara pressed the letter against her heart. "For all these years," she said, "my mother believed he would keep his promise." "He intended to," Han answered, "but he died suddenly before he could reveal everything to the board." Han's expression darkened. "After his death, certain people gained control of the company. They made sure every document connected to your mother disappeared." "Who?" "I don't yet have enough proof." Before Han could continue, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and his face grew tense. "We have to leave." "What's wrong?" "Someone has accessed the old inheritance files." At that very moment, in a luxurious office on the top floor, Executive Director Choi Tae-yun sat behind his polished desk. He was one of the most influential members of Kong Global's board. A young assistant hurried into the room. "Sir, the African cleaner has been seen entering the company library with Mr. Han." Choi slowly removed his glasses. "So," he smiled coldly, "she's finally here." The assistant looked confused. "Should we be concerned?" Choi stood and walked to the window overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline. "I buried that story 20 years ago." He turned around, his eyes filled with determination. "If the board discovers the chairman's original agreement, everything changes." "And the CEO?" the assistant asked. Choi's smile faded. "Kong Min-jun knows nothing. His grandfather never had the chance to tell him." He paused. "And we must make sure he never finds out." The following morning, Amara returned to work as though nothing had happened. She quietly polished the glass walls outside the executive offices. As she worked, Kong Min-jun approached. He stopped beside her. "You speak Korean well." "Thank you. You understand computers." "I learned when I was younger." "You also spent a lot of time in the company library." Amara looked at him calmly. "I enjoy reading about history." Min-jun studied her face. There was honesty in her eyes, but also a sadness he couldn't explain. For reasons he didn't understand, he found himself asking a question he had never asked any employee before. "Have you had breakfast?" Amara blinked in surprise. "No. Come with me." She hesitated. "The cafeteria isn't open yet," Min-jun said. "There's coffee and food in the executive lounge." Several employees passing by froze in disbelief. The CEO had never invited a cleaner anywhere. As whispers spread through the hallway, neither Min-jun nor Amara noticed the furious eyes watching them from the end of the corridor. Director Choi clenched his fists. "This is happening faster than I expected," he muttered. "If Kong Min-jun grows close to her, I could lose everything." For the first time in 2 decades, the carefully buried truth had begun to rise to the surface, and those who feared were preparing to strike. Writing. The executive lounge was a place few employees ever entered. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Han River, and the room was furnished with elegant wooden tables and fresh flowers that were replaced every morning. Amara hesitated at the entrance. "I don't think I belong here," she said quietly. Kong Min-jun looked at her without his usual cold expression. "You're my guest." Reluctantly, she stepped inside. The chef greeted the CEO with a respectful bow before placing a simple breakfast on the table: warm soup, fresh fruit, rice, grilled fish, and tea. Min-jun noticed Amara staring at the food. "When was the last time you ate a proper breakfast?" She smiled politely. "It's been a while." Without another word, he pushed one of the plates toward her. "Eat." For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable. It was the first peaceful moment Amara had experienced since arriving in Seoul. "You don't seem surprised by anything in this building," Min-jun finally said. I've learned that every building has two stories, Amara replied. The one everyone sees. She looked out the window. And the one hidden behind closed doors. Her answer lingered in Min-jun's mind. It was not the response of someone with an ordinary past. Outside the lounge, employees whispered excitedly, "Did you hear? The CEO is having breakfast with the cleaner. Has he lost his mind?" Rumors spread through every department within minutes. Some assumed Amara was secretly related to an executive. Others claimed she had manipulated the CEO. Only Han Suk-woo knew the truth, and he feared the gossip would reach the wrong ears. It already had. Director Choi slammed a file onto his desk. So he invited her into the executive lounge? "Yes, sir," his assistant replied nervously. Choi's face hardened. "We cannot allow their relationship to grow." He opened a locked drawer and removed a thick brown envelope marked confidential. Inside were copies of documents that should have been destroyed years ago. One page carried the signature of the late Chairman Kang. Another listed the transfer of shares intended for Grace Okafor's daughter. Choi stared at the papers for a long moment before feeding one copy into a paper shredder. Thin strips of paper fell into the waste bin. "No evidence," he whispered. "No inheritance. No threat." But he had overlooked one important fact. The originals had never been in his possession. That evening, Han asked Amara to meet him at a quiet tea house near the company. After making sure no one had followed them, he placed a small key on the table. "What is this?" Amara asked. "A safety deposit box." "What's inside?" "The chairman's original will." Amara's eyes widened. "You mean?" Han nodded. "The document everyone believes disappeared." "Why didn't you reveal it years ago?" "Because the chairman instructed me to wait until I found you." He leaned closer. "Tomorrow morning, we'll go to the bank together." For the first time since arriving in Korea, Amara felt hope replacing fear. At last, the truth was within reach. Neither of them noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Inside, Director Choi's assistant lowered a camera after taking several photographs. He immediately sent them to his boss. A message appeared on Choi's phone. "They have the key." Choi's jaw tightened. "Then tomorrow," he said coldly, "they will never reach the bank." Far away, dark clouds gathered over Seoul as the city prepared for a storm. Neither Amara nor Kang Min-jun knew that by the next sunrise, one carefully planned attack would change all of their lives forever. Writing. Rain fell steadily over Seoul the next morning, turning the streets into a blur of headlights and umbrellas. Amara clutched the small brass key Han Suk-woo had entrusted to her. It rested safely inside her coat pocket as she waited outside the subway station. A black sedan pulled up. Han stepped out and opened the passenger door. "Are you ready?" he asked. Amara nodded, more than ever, as they drove toward the bank. Neither of them noticed a second vehicle following at a distance. Inside it sat two men, wearing dark jackets. Their instructions were simple. Take the key. Leave no witnesses. At Kang Global, Kang Min-jun was preparing for an important board meeting when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. A frightened voice whispered, "Mr. Kang, Mr. Han is in danger." Before Min-jun could ask another question, the call ended. His instincts told him something was terribly wrong. Without waiting for his driver, he grabbed his car keys and sped out of the company's underground garage. Meanwhile, Han's car stopped at a red traffic light. A delivery truck suddenly swerved across the intersection, blocking the road. Before Han could react, two masked men jumped from the black sedan behind them. One smashed the driver's window. The other pulled hard on the passenger door. "Give us the key," one of them shouted. Han struggled to hold them back. "Run," he yelled to Amara. She didn't hesitate. Clutching the key, she sprinted into the rain. The attackers chased after her through crowded sidewalks. People screamed and scattered. Amara turned into a narrow alley, her heart pounding. She could hear footsteps getting closer. Just as one of the men reached for her shoulder, a black luxury sedan screeched to a halt across the alley entrance. The driver's door flew open. Kang Min-jun stepped out. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted. The attackers froze for a split second, recognizing the CEO. They exchanged nervous glances before fleeing back toward their vehicle. Within moments, they disappeared into the traffic. Min-jun rushed toward Amara. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, struggling to catch her breath. "Han!" They both ran back to the intersection. Han was sitting against his damaged car, holding his injured arm. "It looks worse than it is," he said with a faint smile. "The key." Amara held it up. "I still have it." Relief washed over Han's face. They failed. An hour later, the three of them enter a private room inside one of Seoul's oldest banks. The manager greeted Han respectfully. "I've been expecting this day for many years." He unlocked a large safety deposit box. Inside lay a sealed envelope bearing the signature of the late Chairman Kang. Beside it rested a leather-bound journal and a small velvet box. Han carefully opened the envelope. The room fell silent. It was the chairman's original will. The document clearly stated that, in gratitude for Grace Okafor's courage and sacrifice, a significant share of Kang Global had been placed in trust for her daughter, Amara Okafor, to receive upon reaching adulthood and presenting proof of her identity. Kang Min-jun stared at the document in disbelief. He looked at Amara, then back at the will. "My grandfather," he whispered. "He really did this." Han nodded. He never broke a promise. Min-jun lowered his eyes. Memories flooded back. His grandfather often speaking of a brave woman in Africa who would save his life, always saying, "One day, our family will repay that debt." As a child, Min-jun had never understood what those words meant. Now he did. He turned toward Amara. His voice was filled with regret. "I'm sorry." She looked at him, confused. "For what?" "For judging you before I knew who you were." Amara smiled gently. "You judge my uniform." She paused. "You never knew my heart." Those words struck Min-jun more deeply than any accusation could have. At that very moment, hundreds of floors above the city, Director Choi received a phone call. His assistant's voice trembled. "Sir, they reached the bank." Silence. "And they found the original will." The phone slipped from Choi's hand. For the first time in 20 years, the secret he had fought so hard to bury had finally come to light. But he was not a man who surrendered easily. As he slowly looked out over the Seoul skyline, his expression turned cold. "If I cannot hide the truth anymore," he murmured, "then I'll destroy everyone who knows it." The battle for Kang Global had officially begun. Writing. News of the chairman's original will spread quietly among a handful of trusted lawyers before the end of the day. Although the document had not yet been made public, one thing was certain. The future of Kang Global was about to change forever. Han Suk-woo insisted that the original will remain in the bank's secure custody until the company's legal advisors could verify every page. "No one touches this document again," he said firmly. Amara agreed. She had waited more than 20 years. She could wait a few more days if it meant the truth would finally be protected. The next morning, Kang Min-jun called an emergency board meeting. The directors entered the boardroom with confused expressions. No one knew why they had been summoned so suddenly. Director Choi sat confidently at the far end of the table, pretending that nothing had happened. When everyone was seated, Min-jun stood. "I have an important announcement." The room became silent. "My late grandfather's original has been recovered." Several directors looked at one another in surprise. Director Choi remained expressionless. "I've also asked an independent legal team to verify the document." One board member raised his hand. "What does this have to do with today's meeting?" Min-jun looked directly at Director Choi. "Everything." He pressed a button on the remote. The screen behind him displayed a scanned copy of the chairman's handwritten letter to Grace Okafor. Gasps filled the room. "This letter confirms that my grandfather created a legal trust for Grace Okafor's daughter." Whispers spread across the table. Director Choi slowly stood. "Mr. CO, with all due respect, anyone could forge an old letter." Min-jun remained calm. "I expected you to say that." He nodded toward the conference room doors. They opened. Two independent lawyers entered, carrying sealed evidence folders. Behind them walked Han Suk-woo. The lawyers placed the folders on the table. "The signatures have been authenticated," one lawyer announced. "The documents are genuine." Director Choi's confidence began to crack. Just then, The boardroom doors opened once more. Every eye turned. Amara walked in wearing a simple navy blue business suit instead of her cleaning uniform. The room fell completely silent. Many of the executives did not recognize her at first. Then realization spread across their faces. The cleaner? That's her. Amara walked calmly to the front of the room. She bowed respectfully. My name is Amara Okafor. I did not come to Korea to take what belongs to someone else. She paused, looking around the room. I came only to receive what was promised to my mother by a man of honor. Her voice was steady. My mother never asked for wealth. She saved a stranger's life because she believed every human life has value. She looked toward the portrait of the late chairman, hanging on the wall. He kept his promise. Her eyes then met Director Choi's. Someone else did not. The room was so quiet that even the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. Director Choi suddenly laughed. A slow, mocking laugh. You've told a touching story. He leaned forward. But stories don't control companies. He slid a folder across the table. I have enough voting support on this board to reject any attempt to transfer those shares. Several directors exchanged nervous looks. Min Jun frowned. You've been buying influence. I've been protecting this company, Choi replied coldly. For the first time, Amara understood that proving the truth was only the beginning. Winning justice would require another battle. As the meeting ended, Min Jun caught up with Amara outside the boardroom. I owe you more than an apology, he said. She smiled gently. You owe your grandfather one thing. What is that? Finish what he started. Min Jun nodded. I will. From a nearby corridor, Han watched the two of them. For the first time in many years, he saw hope. Not because of the inheritance, not because of the company, but because two people from completely different worlds had begun to trust each other. Neither of them realized that Director Choi had already made one final, desperate move. Hidden in his office safe was a file containing evidence of a crime committed 20 years earlier, a crime connected not only to the missing shares, but also to the mysterious death of Chairman Kong. If that secret was exposed, everything everyone believed about the chairman's final days would be turned upside down. This revelation sets up the next stage of the story, where the inheritance dispute becomes a deeper investigation into the chairman's death, drawing Amara and Kong Min Jun even closer together. Writing. The emergency board meeting ended, but no one returned to work as usual. Groups of executives whispered in the hallways. Employees refreshed the company news portal every few minutes, hoping for updates. For the first time in years, Kong Global was divided. Some believed Amara deserved everything the late chairman had promised her. Others feared the inheritance dispute would damage the company's reputation. Only a few knew that the greatest secret had yet to be uncovered. Late that evening, Kong Min Jun sat alone in his grandfather's old office. The room had remained almost untouched since the chairman's death. Books still filled the shelves. A fountain pen rested on the polished desk. On the wall hung a family photograph taken years before. Min Jun slowly opened one of the desk drawers. Inside was a small notebook he had never seen before. Most of its pages were blank, but tucked into the back cover was a handwritten note. If you are reading this, then someone has hidden the truth. Trust Han Suk-woo. Trust the daughter of Grace Okafor. Together, they will help you protect this company. Min Jun stared at the words. His grandfather had written Amara's name years before she ever arrived in Korea. He closed his eyes. I should have trusted you from the beginning, he whispered. The following morning, Han met Amara and Min Jun in a quiet conference room. I've spent years collecting small pieces of evidence, Han said, but I never had enough to prove what really happened after the chairman died. He placed several old files on the table. There were irregular financial transfers. Important records disappeared. And 3 former executives resigned within a single month. Amara carefully examined the documents. Someone was covering their tracks. Han nodded. Exactly. Min Jun looked at one report more closely. His expression changed. This payment. He pointed to a large transfer made just 2 weeks after the chairman's funeral. It was authorized by Director Choi. Han looked surprised. I never noticed that. Amara leaned closer. The money was sent to a private company. She traced the company name with her finger. It no longer exists. The three exchanged worried glances. The mystery had become much larger than missing shares. Across the city, Director Choi entered an abandoned warehouse near the old harbor. A gray-haired man was already waiting. "You should never have contacted me again," the stranger said. "We're both in danger now." Choi handed him an envelope filled with cash. "I need one final favor." "What kind of favor?" "Destroy every remaining piece of evidence connected to Chairman Kang's last week alive." The man hesitated. "And if I refuse?" Choi's voice turned icy. "Then you'll explain your role to the police." The stranger lowered his head. "I understand." Neither of them noticed a small camera mounted on a nearby building. Someone had been watching the entire meeting. That evening, Amara stood on the rooftop of Kong Global, looking over the lights of Seoul. The wind gently moved her hair. Min-jun joined her, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. He handed one to her. "For someone who came here searching for justice," he said softly, "you've shown remarkable kindness." Amara smiled. "My mother taught me that bitterness can steal your future." She looked toward the city. "I don't hate the people who wronged us. I just want the truth." Min-jun nodded. "So do I." For a few quiet moments, they simply stood together, watching the light shimmer below. Then Min-jun spoke again. "When all of this is over," he paused, "I'd like to show you the Korea my grandfather loved." Amara looked at him with a gentle smile. "I'd like that." Neither of them realized Han had just received an urgent phone call. His face turned pale. He immediately ran toward the rooftop. "Mr. Kong." Both of them turned. Han struggled to catch his breath. "The witness?" "What witness?" Min-jun asked. "The man who handled Director Choi's secret payments." "What about him?" Han swallowed hard. "He's disappeared." A cold silence fell over the rooftop. If the witness had vanished, their strongest chance of exposing the full truth might have vanished with him. Far below, a black car quietly pulled away from the curb. Inside, Director Choi watched the rooftop through tinted windows. He smiled for the first time in days. "They're already too late," he said. Or so he believed. Writing, the news of the missing witness hit the investigation like a storm. Han Suk-woo paced back and forth inside his office. "I should have contacted him sooner," he said, his voice heavy with regret. Min-jun placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Blaming yourself won't help us now. We need to find him before someone else does." Amara quietly unfolded a map of Seoul on the conference table. "The warehouse where Director Choi met him wasn't chosen at random," she said. "If he was trying to disappear, he would likely avoid busy areas." Han looked at her with curiosity. "What makes you think that?" "My mother always taught me that frightened people don't run toward crowds. They run toward places where they feel invisible." The three of them began tracing possible locations connected to the witness's past. Then Min-jun noticed something. The shipping company. He pointed to an old file. It may have closed years ago, but it owned a small apartment building near the harbor. Han's eyes widened. He could still be hiding there. An hour later, they arrived at the aging apartment building. The narrow hallways were quiet. Most of the mailboxes were empty. They climbed to the 3rd floor and knocked on apartment 307. No answer. Just as Han was about to leave, Amara noticed a faint light beneath the door. "Someone's inside." Min-jun knocked again. "We're not here to hurt you. We only want the truth." After a long silence, the door slowly opened. An elderly man peered through the gap. His face was tired, and fear filled his eyes. "I know who you are," he whispered. "You've come because of Chairman Kong." Han nodded. "Yes." The man stepped aside. "I've spent 20 years waiting for this day." Inside the small apartment, faded documents and newspaper clippings covered the table. The man introduced himself as Lee Jae-sung, a former accountant for Kong Global. "I never wanted to be part of the cover-up," he confessed. "Director Choi ordered me to alter financial records after the chairman died." He opened an old metal box. Inside were photocopies of payment records, handwritten notes, and a small cassette tape. "I kept these because I knew one day someone would ask what really happened." Min-jun carefully picked up the cassette. What's on this? Lee lowered his head. It's a recording of the chairman's final meeting. The room fell silent. Back at Kong Global, the cassette was played using an old recorder from the company archives. Static filled the room. Then an elderly voice emerged. It was Chairman Kong. "If anything happens to me," he said, "my grandson must honor every promise I made." Another voice interrupted. It belonged to Director Choi. "Chairman, you're making a mistake." "My decision is final," the chairman replied firmly. The shares belonged to Grace Okafor's daughter. The recording suddenly ended with a loud crash. Then silence. Everyone in the room stared at one another. Amara's eyes filled with tears. Min Jun clenched his fists. Han whispered, "This changes everything." At the same moment, Director Choi received alarming news. His assistant rushed into his office. "Sir, they found Lee Jae-sung." Choi stood so abruptly that his chair fell backward. And he gave him the recording. For the first time in decades, panic replaced confidence. Director Choi looked toward the portrait of Chairman Kong, hanging on the wall. "You should have let the past stay buried," he muttered. Outside his office, police officers stepped out an elevator, carrying a warrant. The battle for Kong Global was no longer just a corporate dispute. It had become a criminal investigation. As the officers walked toward Director Choi's office, he quietly reached into his desk drawer. Inside lay a passport, a large amount of cash, and a one-way airline ticket. He had prepared an escape plan years ago. Now he had to decide whether to run or face justice. The elevator doors slid open. 3 detectives walked into the executive corridor, followed by officers from the Financial Crimes Unit. Employees stopped working. Conversations died instantly. Everyone watched as the officers approached Director Choi's office. One detective knocked firmly. "Director Choi, we have a warrant to search your office and seize company records." There was no answer. The detective tried the handle. "Locked. Open the door immediately." Silence. The officers exchanged glances before forcing the door open. The office was empty. A window overlooking the parking garage was slightly open. One officer hurried to the window. "He's gone." Several floors below, Director Choi walked calmly through the underground parking garage, wearing a maintenance worker's jacket and cap. He pulled the brim lower over his face. Years of planning had prepared him for this moment. A black SUV waited near the exit, with its engine running. Just as he reached the vehicle, a familiar voice stopped him. "Running won't erase what you've done." Choi turned. Standing a few meters away were Kong Min-jun, Amara, and Han Suk-woo. Min-jun had guessed that Choi would use the old emergency exit, known only to senior executives. For a moment, no one moved. Then Choi laughed bitterly. "You think this is about money?" He shook his head. "No, this company was built by people too weak to make difficult decisions." "My grandfather believed in keeping promises," Min-jun replied, "and you believed in breaking them." Choi's expression darkened. "I protected Kong Global." "You protected yourself," Han answered quietly. Police sirens echoed to the garage. Choi looked toward the exit. There was no escape. His shoulders slowly dropped. "I never wanted any of this," he whispered. Amara stepped forward. "Then tell us the truth." For several seconds, Choi remained silent. Finally, he spoke. "The chairman discovered irregular investments I had hidden. He was going to remove me from the board. I begged him to reconsider." He lowered his eyes. "We argued." I left his office furious. The next morning, the chairman suffered a fatal heart attack before he could present the revised shared documents to the board. Min-jun stared at him. "So you didn't kill him?" Choi shook his head. "No, but after his death..." His voice broke. "I destroyed documents, bribed executives, and buried every promise he made. I told myself it was for the company's stability." He looked at Amara, but every year the guilt became heavier. The detectives approached. "Director Choi, you're under arrest for fraud, destruction of evidence, bribery, and obstruction of justice." Choi quietly extended his hands. The handcuffs clicked shut. As he was led away, he stopped in front of Amara. "I cannot ask for forgiveness." "No," Amara replied gently. but you can tell the whole truth." He nodded once. "I will." For the first time in 20 years, Director Choi chose honesty over fear. Several weeks later, the High Court ruled that the late Chairman Kang's original will was valid. The trust created for Grace Okafor's daughter would finally be honored. Amara officially became one of Kang Global's largest shareholders. Reporters from across South Korea gathered outside the courthouse. One journalist shouted, "Ms. Okafor, what will you do with your shares?" Amara smiled. "My mother taught me that blessings grow when they're shared. I'll use this opportunity to create scholarship for young people in both Africa and South Korea, so that kindness can continue crossing borders just as it did years ago." Her answer made headlines across the country. That evening, Min Jun invited Amara to a quiet hill overlooking Seoul. The city lights sparkled below like countless stars. He handed her a small velvet box. Amara looked surprised. Inside was a silver pendant that had once belonged to his grandfather, carefully restored by a local jeweler. "My grandfather wanted our families connected by gratitude," Min Jun said softly. "I hope we can choose to stay connected by love." Amara's eyes filled with tears. Instead of answering immediately, she reached for his hand. She smiled. "I think you would have liked that." Above them, the night sky stretched endlessly over Seoul. For the first time in many years, the promises of the past no longer felt like a burden. They had become the foundation of a new beginning. What would you do if everyone treated you like a cleaner, only to discover you own half the company? Tell us your favorite moment in the story, and don't forget to subscribe for the next unforgettable Afro-Korean romance. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Afrokorea Seoul Stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next emotional romance. Another incredible Afro-Korean love story is coming soon.